Millions of families survived on almost nothing during the Great Depression. So how did they end up better with money than most people today? Neighbors still talk about how parents stretched pennies, tracked every meal, and shared food when they barely had any for themselves. Their discipline shocked later generations, but it kept them alive. So what were the money habits that made them stronger than us? Let's uncover it. Back then, you learned to wait for things. And it made you better with money. Before credit cards and click to buy, people had to wait. If you wanted something, a bicycle, a new coat, a radio, you worked for it first. Then you saved, then you waited. And once you finally bought it, you took care of it like it mattered. This was the 1930s to the 1950s. Average folks didn't expect to get everything right away. They respected the process. In 1940, the average family made around $1,300 a year. If something cost $80, like a washing machine, that wasn't a quick decision. That took time. You'd save for weeks or even months, maybe socking away $1 or $2 from every paycheck. Kids learned it early too. They circled toy ads months ahead and dropped coins into a can until Christmas. No one saw waiting as a failure. It wasn't embarrassing. In fact, it was respected. You'd hear someone say, "We're saving up for that," and people nodded. It meant you had discipline, a plan. That mindset taught pride, patience, and the kind of financial control most people today struggle with. Fast forward to now, and people expect things instantly, financed or delivered tomorrow. But does that urgency make us happier, or just more stressed? When you don't pause, you lose that sense of earned joy. That moment when something finally becomes yours because you made it happen. But what changed? How did we go from saving with pride to borrowing without thinking? Owing money was personal, and folks tried hard to avoid it. In most towns during the Great Depression, and even into the 1950s, debt wasn't private. If you owed someone, word traveled fast. Your reputation mattered, and once it was damaged, it was hard to rebuild. People were proud of staying square. Borrowing money meant you'd failed to plan, or worse, you were seen as unreliable. In 1937, only 15% of families had installment loans. Most paid in full or used layaway, where you paid week by week until something was fully yours. No item left the store until it was paid off. That delayed pickup wasn't frustrating. It was honorable. Pawn shops stayed busy, especially in cities. Folks would bring in watches, tools, wedding rings. But even that was treated like a temporary emergency. You never wanted to lose the item, so getting it back was a priority. You planned for it. Bartering was another tool. If someone couldn't afford a service, they offered a skill. Need your roof patched? Maybe trade a week's worth of firewood stacking. That wasn't seen as odd. That was normal. Debt carried weight, not just in dollars, but in how others saw you. So families avoided it however they could. They stretched what they had, reused, repaired, waited. Today, debt is treated more like a background noise, just part of life. But back then, it had sharp edges. You felt it every day, and most people chose discomfort over owing. So how did they keep their lives moving without loans, cards, or digital banks? They leaned on skills, not swipes. Let's talk about how being handy wasn't an extra. It was survival. Knowing how to do things yourself wasn't fancy. It was just how you got by. In the 1930s and 40s, calling a repairman was a last resort. Most families handled what they could on their own. They had to. Hemming pants? You did that in the kitchen? Fixing a broken step? That was a Saturday morning job with a borrowed hammer and bent nails you pulled from scrap wood. No YouTube tutorials, just your hands, your neighbors, and whatever tools you could get hold of. A 1935 Sears catalog didn't just sell goods, it sold parts. Need a crankshaft or a chicken brooder? You could order it. Why? Because people repaired what broke. They didn't toss it. A busted lamp or worn-out shoes still had years left, with some effort. Skills weren't hobbies. They were the difference between getting by and falling behind. That's why kids learned early. Mending socks, helping in gardens. Even the youngest kids had chores tied to real outcomes, like heating the house or feeding the family. And that mindset built quiet confidence. You knew you could stretch things. You weren't helpless when something failed. You found a fix. So what shifted us away from that kind of self-reliance? When did it become easier to replace than repair? The clue is in how people managed money without screens, apps, or plastic. Budgets weren't in apps. They were in jars, envelopes, and handwritten notes. Picture payday in 1942. Your father comes home with his wages in cash. He lays it on the kitchen table. Rent goes into one envelope, groceries into another. Gas, school shoes, doctor visits, all labeled, all planned. That was the budget. There weren't any charts or graphs, just the reality of what you had, and the firm rule that when the envelope ran dry, that category was done for the week. That simplicity gave people peace. They knew where every dime went. Some families used jars instead, a row lined up above the sink. You could see the groceries shrinking as the week went on. But it also meant no surprises. You felt in control, even during tight months. In 1933, the average income was $1,550 a year. You weren't juggling 5 subscriptions or buy now, pay later bills. You were trying to heat your home and keep shoes on growing kids' feet. Budgeting wasn't a lifestyle, it was survival. And people got good at it. When a big expense popped up, like car repairs or medical bills, it didn't throw them off completely. That's where saving jars came in. People planned ahead for the unpredictable, even if it took months. You could feel the discipline in the house. Everyone played a part. Kids knew not to ask for extras near the end of the month. But what about money that felt too small to matter? The answer lived in a coffee can near the sink, and it added up faster than you'd think. Saving a few pennies a day wasn't seen as silly. It was smart. During the Great Depression, you didn't leave loose change lying around. Every coin had a purpose. A nickel could buy a loaf of bread in 1932. A dime got you a can of beans. So people saved, even when it felt like they had nothing. They used jars, cans, and old tobacco tins. Coins went in one by one. Slowly, they added up. And when the furnace broke or shoes wore thin, those coins mattered more than anything. Small savings didn't feel small. A 1940s school lunch cost 15 cents. A gallon of gas, 10 cents. So imagine how far a few quarters could go for a family with 4 kids and 1 income. Grandparents would tell stories about using saved pennies for Christmas. A family in Ohio in 1936 used their year's worth of coin savings, $17.60, to buy their children winter coats and oranges. That was enough to change a holiday. The idea wasn't just saving money. It was about being ready. Even when jobs came back during the war, families kept the habit. The memory of having nothing stuck with them. And those small savings? They built a cushion when the next wave hit. So where'd that mindset go? Why do we walk past coins today like they're trash? Some say it disappeared when we stopped planning for the long haul and started reacting to every bump instead. But one group kept planning quietly, month after month, even while the future looked shaky. People planned years ahead, even when they weren't sure what tomorrow looked like. You'd hear stories from the 1930s about families setting aside for Christmas in January. That wasn't an exaggeration. It was the only way it worked. They didn't just think about the week ahead. They thought in seasons, years, even generations. In 1935, many rural families used ledger books to track long-term costs. They wrote down expected school fees, farm repairs, tax estimates, even funeral savings. Some folks bought a burial plot before they bought a sofa. Not because they were dark, but because they believed in being prepared. They knew bad weather could wipe out a harvest. They knew medical bills didn't wait. So they saved what they could, when they could. A little every month, quietly, with no shortcuts. The phrase rainy day fund wasn't cute. It was serious. A widow in Minnesota once told her granddaughter, "We saved for the roof in spring, even if it didn't leak yet, because someday it would." That's how people thought. And when the war came, that habit helped. War bonds weren't just patriotic. They were a structured way to keep saving for tomorrow. Millions signed up. Today, most people live paycheck to paycheck. But these folks built lives week by week, season by season, sometimes with barely more than faith and numbers in a notebook. But what held them together during all that? What kept them thankful when so little went right? One part of the answer lived at the dinner table, and it had nothing to do with what was served. Gratitude wasn't just a holiday word. It was how people got through hard times. During the 1930s, gratitude wasn't something people saved for Thanksgiving. It showed up at supper tables, front porches, and church steps every day, even in the worst years. A hot meal on a cold night meant more than gold. One paycheck covering the bills felt like winning a lottery. You didn't need much to feel rich, just enough to be warm, fed, and safe. Can you imagine that kind of mindset now? Neighbors helped each other because they knew what it felt like to go without. If your cow stopped giving milk, someone else poured you a jar. If your husband got laid off, someone offered work, pulling weeds or fixing fences. It was survival, stitched together with kindness. In 1933, unemployment hit 25%. That's 1 in 4. But people kept showing up with casseroles and secondhand clothes. Gratitude was loud. It lived in handshakes, letters, and Sunday visits. Even kids learned it early. They said thank you for apples, gloves, crayons. And it wasn't fake. It came from knowing things could fall apart fast. You were grateful for what held. That attitude didn't just help emotionally. It actually stretched money. People took care of what they had. They avoided waste. They respected effort. But even with all that thankfulness, something else kept those communities stable. It wasn't government programs or outside help. It came from something more local, more personal. It came from the quiet lessons passed between neighbors over split firewood and borrowed tools. And some of those lessons have almost vanished. Money lessons came from your neighbors, not online strangers. Before budgeting apps and YouTube advice, people leaned on neighbors. Real ones. The kind you wave to every morning. They taught you how to make a buck stretch, and sometimes how to survive with almost none. In small towns and tight cities, advice traveled faster than the news. Don't plant tomatoes near the alley, they won't ripen. Boil meat bones twice for extra broth. If the shoe's a bit too big, line it with newspaper. These weren't hacks, they were lifelines. In the 1940s, a Chicago community formed a food buying club. Families pooled money, bought bulk beans and flour, and split it up. No formal contract, just trust. In Kentucky coal towns, men swapped labor like currency, hauling, chopping, fixing, painting. Bartering mattered, eggs for thread, soap for wood. Trust wasn't just polite, it was practical. If your name meant something, you had credit. If you broke it, word spread. No algorithm needed. Even discipline came local. A neighbor saw you waste food. They said something. Kids learned early. You didn't need a TikTok trend to understand value. You just watched what others respected. That closeness created something tech can't replace. Shared accountability. When people see each other daily, their choices change. You didn't blow your money if you knew your neighbor might need help next week, or if you might. Every moment from that era carries another lesson waiting to be uncovered. So click the next video on your screen right now before it disappears. Another story is already calling your name.